Hi everyone, welcome back to the Afterlife of Holly Chase. We left off on chapter 3 where they had just found out who the new Scrooge was, and it just happens to be a very young, hot guy. So let's get into the next chapter to see how everything turns out. The Afterlife of Holly Chase, chapter 4. I don't know about you, but I don't like him, Marty said loudly as he scarfed down his microwave macaroni and cheese a few days later. He'd been saying that to anyone who earshot since Blackpool had first announced the new Scrooge's name, Ethan. Ethan Jonathan Winters III, to be exact. Of course, he was all the employees of Project Scrooge had been talking about in the break room. Ethan Jonathan Winters III, eye candy. I don't like him either, Grant said. Jealous? Sniffed my inner Yvonne, which was probably true. He's a Scrooge, so isn't he supposed to be unlikable? Stephanie asked. Oh, sure, they're all unlikable, Marty said with a shrug, but you always end up rooting for them. You hope things work out for them in the end. I'm going to have a hard time rooting for Ethan Winters, is all I'm saying. I think he's too young to be a Scrooge, Grant added. I could have argued this point, of course, but then I came to the Scrooge situation from a unique perspective, and I didn't think Ethan Winters was so bad. He came from a good family, and by good, I mean rich. He was the heir to one of the biggest real estate dynasties in New York, a family legacy that stretched back more than 200 years, practically at Rockefeller. He had stellar taste in clothes, and then there was how he looked. Oh, how he looked. Coming in at 6'2", a little tall for my taste, since I didn't like to crane my neck in order to look at a guy, but otherwise perfectly proportioned. Not too beefy, not too skinny. Hair, dark brown, and always neatly cut and meticulously styled. Blue eyes, but in some pictures I noticed they appeared a steely gray, and a face that could have been chiseled by Michelangelo. Oh yeah, the new Scrooge was like sunburn, like lava, like the heat of 1,000 suns. The universe was doing me a favor putting this boy up on the board. But he's as rotten as the rest of them, said Marty. Okay, reports were coming in from Dave's team about our Scrooge 173 doing some not-so-good stuff to his fellow man. The way he spoke to the people who worked for him, the maid and the cook, and so on. The way he treated the other boys at his exclusive all-male prep school. The way he jumped into cabs that someone else had held for assistance, or showed up to fancy charity events without actually doing anything for the charity. But who was I to judge? Stephanie took a sip of her chocolate milk. So what happens now? Now we get to break inside his head, Marty said wickedly, and take over his mind. From the next table over, I checked my watch and gathered together the remains of my half-eaten lunch. Stephanie noticed me getting up and told the tech guys that she had to go. She followed me out of the break room and down the hall to my office, even though there was still 10 minutes left of her lunch hour. She started yammering as soon as my door closed behind us. Miss Havisham, I winced. Do me a favor and call me Holly. Havisham was a crazy old spinster in Great Expectations. The one who never takes off her wedding dress. That's the one, so Holly, please. She smiled. Holly. Okay. The paperwork for last year is all finished, and I filed it with the records department. I also made you a copy for your office. I color-coded it pink. It's in your filing cabinet, she informed me. I have a filing cabinet? She pointed behind me, where, yes, what do you know, there was a filing cabinet tucked against the back wall. It looked freshly dusted, too. Great. I sat down at my desk, which was now neatly organized. No papers or work orders or anything. And the paperwork that usually took 2 or 3 weeks to get all squared away was apparently done. all thanks to my perky new assistant. It didn't totally suck, but today she was wearing a navy blue t-shirt with sailboats on it that read, "Not all who wander are lost." That would have been okay by itself, but she had paired it with a bright red cardigan and a white eyelet skirt. Happy 4th of July in April, everyone. It physically hurt me to look at her. Plus, she was just so in my face with her big glasses and her cheerful smile and her squeaky little voice. I had to get rid of her. I tried to think of a new errand to send her on. I come up with a few good ones in the past week. More expensive coffee, a wild goose chase after a file that didn't exist in the records department, a 2-hour journey to an office supply store halfway across the city to pick up a specific type of pen, the only kind I could work with, I told her, but she always came back sooner than I hoped. Stephanie sat down across from my desk, perched on the edge of her seat like she might take flight at any moment. "Is there anything else I could do for you today?" I stared out the window at the building across the street. I was out of ideas. It was Friday. Maybe I could tell her to go home early. If not, I was wondering if you might finally have time to answer some questions I have about the company, she said in a hopeful voice. I spun my chair back around to find her waiting with a pen and a notebook. "Didn't you get kind of a briefing when Boz hired you?" She shook her head. "Boz just gave me a copy of A Christmas Carol. He said you'd explain everything to me when you had time." I sighed. "Did he tell you anything? Anything at all?" She chewed on her lip guiltily. "I mean, I understand the general concept of the company, saving people, rehabilitating them one soul at a time, changing the world. But how it all happens, I don't know much about the actual process." She positioned her pen on the paper. "So I'm ready to learn. Tell me everything." Okay. Everything seemed like a lot. "Well, as you may have noticed, the company revolves around one particular day of the year." "Start with the obvious," Yvonne always said. Oh, I know this," Stephanie squealed. "Christmas. I just love Christmas. When I was a kid, I used to stay up all night on Christmas Eve. I couldn't sleep. I was so excited, and then I would—" "Stephanie," I stopped her. "Yes?" "There's a lot to go over here, and if we're going to make it through it all before quitting time, I'm going to need you to focus." "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll be quiet." She made a motion like she was zipping her lips together. I sighed. There are different branches of Project Scrooge all over the world, in London, obviously, where the whole thing began, but also in Tokyo, Sydney, New Delhi. You get the idea? We here in New York City cover the entire United States. "What about Canada?" she asked. "Who does Canada?" "I don't think there's ever been a Scrooge in Canada," I answered. "At least not that I've heard of." "No Scrooge in Canada? Eee!" she said out loud as she wrote down that in her notebook. Then she giggled at her own joke. I soldiered on. "Every year at Project Scrooge is broken up in 5 staves." She frowned. "Staves? Don't you mean stages?" "No, I mean staves. It's a musical term, like part of a song, because this company is based on A Christmas Carol," she bursted out. "Staves, that's so neat." Or totally corny, but okay. Stave 1 is the generation part. That's where Blackpool comes up with the name of the new Scrooge, which he does in the first few months of the year, while the rest of us are on break. So we're technically into Stave 2 now, the identification part of the process. Identification, she wrote. What's that? Blackpool tells us who the Scrooge is because he can see it, somehow. I'm not sure how that works, actually, except that he can see the future. Then it's our job to figure out how the person Blackpool picks fits into the Ebenezer Scrooge narrative. That's the big task for us. It takes most of our time leading up to Christmas. She looked like she was going to ask another question, so I talked faster. It's our responsibility as Team Lamp to filter through the Scrooge's memories. We determine the turning points in his life, the important moments, the game changers. That's so we can decide what scenes from his past to show him when we come to him on Christmas. Stephanie's pen paused against the paper for a moment. And how do you get his memories? Do you really take over his mind? I shook my head. It's a delicate process. One part science, one part, I didn't want to say the word magic because that sounded too Disneyland. Supernatural stuff. I kept going. Anyway, so that's identification. Then comes preparation, where we come up with a detailed plan for the night we're going to kidnap the Scrooge, what we're going to show him, and what we're going to say. After that comes the actual performance. December the 24th. Although we don't enter the Scrooge's bedroom until midnight, so it's technically the 25th, Christmas. Stephanie grinned. I can only imagine how thrilling it would be to perform a new version of the Christmas Carol, but for reals, every single year. Yes, thrilling. Boss had assured me that Stephanie wasn't there to replace me, but I still didn't love hearing her gush over my job. She could get her own job. And then what? What's the fifth stage? I shrugged. That's called the evolution. It's like maintenance. As I understand it, keeping an eye on the past Scrooges, making sure that they don't backslide. Do they backslide? She seemed disappointed by the idea. I don't know. I don't know much about the successful Scrooges. I just knew about one particular failed Scrooge. Me. The evaluation people hang out in the lower levels of the building. I don't go downstairs like ever. Stephanie looked over her notes. So, Gippy, huh? The 5 stages are generation, identification, preparation, performance, and evaluation. G-I-P-P-E. Gippy. I held in a high sigh. Right. I got a few more questions. Of course she did. I'm still unclear about all the identification part. What exactly are we trying to identify? We're trying to match up our current Scrooge life with the Christmas Carol story, basically, I explained. We need to figure out, identify all the major characters like the Freds and the Fezziwigs and all the others. Fezziwigs? She looked confused. It's all in the book Boz gave you, A Christmas Carol. You should read it cover to cover. Each Scrooge had a series of characters that are meant to represent something important in his life. The Fezziwig, for instance, represents an early role model the Scrooge had who was kind of generous. In the book, he was an old chubby guy, but with our Scrooge, the Fezziwig could be anybody. It could be a skinny woman or a little kid, just so long as the person represents the spirit of giving and open-heartedness. That the Scrooge needs to see. Get it? Identify the characters, she wrote down. So who are the other characters besides Fezziwig, I mean? I was about to run down the list, but then I figured it'd be easy just to show her. Come on, follow me. We headed down the hall toward conference room A. Little Dorrit on my heels like a happy Labrador. The room was much bigger than conference room B, with a large table in the middle surrounded by chairs. I flipped on the lights. The big cork board that had been in the go room, the capital B board, had been moved to the head of the table, with Ethan's picture stuck on top of it. The walls around the perimeter of the room were set up with large whiteboards, each labeled with a name, starting with one that read Marley. On the far left, Marley, Fan, Fezziwig, Belle, Cratchit, Portleys, Fred, Tiny Tim. Wow, remarked Stephanie. I crossed over the board that read Fizzywig. This is the room where we have all of our monthly meetings on the Scrooge situation. In the time between these meetings, we're supposed to identify an equivalent for each of these characters, I said. We as Team Lamp are responsible for the Jacob Marley, the Fan, the Fizzywig, and the Bell, the important people in the Scrooge's past. And then Dave's team handled the Cratchit, the Portly Gentleman, the Fred, and the Tiny Tim, since those are all people in the present. We focus on one of these characters every couple of months. So from now on, until the end of June, we'll work on Marley, and Dave's team will work on Cratchit. So what does the Ghost of Christmas Future do? Stephanie asked. Blackpool? Mostly he just sits around looking like Grumpy Cat. But apparently while he's doing that, he sees visions of the Scrooge's future. So he helps with the identification thing too, since he can tell what's going to happen to people. The door to the conference room opened and Dave and Boz walked in. They looked momentarily surprised to see us in there. Oh, Havisham, Dorrit, hello, Boz said. Hello, Stephanie replied cheerfully. She even waved at Boz. As I was saying, we've at least one fed on almost all the central locations, Dave reported to Boz. It's not as many as last year, but I think it's good coverage for now. Excellent, Boz replied. I had an idea. Can we take a peek at what we have set up? I'm showing Dorrit here how the company works, and that might be nice for her to see. Dave and Boz exchanged glances. Of course, Boz says at last. We'll go have a look right now. We went back down the hall towards Dave's office. Dave had to swipe his badge to open the door. Inside was a fairly regular-looking office with a desk and filing cabinet and so on, and a lot like mine. But on the other side of the room, there was an oversized bright red door. And through that door, there was a large room filled with television monitors and a bunch of other fancy-looking electronical equipment. The surveillance room, I'd been in there only for a few times myself. It was pretty cool. Wow, breathed Stephanie. This is like a spy movie. Dave picked up a remote and pressed a button, and suddenly all of the monitors turned on, each one showing a different location. Before we really get started on our work with the Scrooge, Dave's team has to set up extensive surveillance. I nodded at Dave. The company monitors his job, his house, the places he goes out to eat, anywhere where we can observe him interacting with the world. That way, wherever the Scrooge goes, we can watch him. In the bathroom? Stephanie Griffiths. No, not in the bathroom. Ew. We don't monitor bathrooms, Dave said gently. We don't have cameras in churches either, I added. It was Boz's weirdest rule. Yes, we allow privacy in presence of the Maker, Boz said, like that explained it. Not that a lot of Scrooges like to hang out in churches, I pointed out, which was why I found the rules so completely weird. Though we did have this one a few years ago who was a church deacon. He was the you're all going to hell type, but then he used to swipe money from the collection plate. A total cliche. Boz coughed. I realized I was getting off topic. Anyway, I gestured around the room. This is how the company knows what's happening with Scrooge. Indoors, that is, said Dave. We never have great coverage outside, but most Scrooges are homebodies anyway, so it works. Stephanie and I walked around the monitor to monitor and peered into the rooms of Ethan's penthouse apartment, his bedroom, the kitchen, the multiple living and dining spaces, and the elevator, his school, several classrooms, the library, the dining room, the major foyer, and the stairs, and another building I wasn't familiar with. Ethan was in the school gym at the moment. He was playing tennis, wearing black gym shorts that hit him about 6 inches above the knee and a simple polo that he was sweating a little. Thank you, universe. I watched as he gracefully backhanded the tennis ball at his opponent, his biceps flexing, his legs shifting position in sync with his arms. He raised his non-racket arm and wiped the perspiration from his perfectly shaped forehead, and I could have swooned. Gorgeous. Everything about him spectacular. You can tell he's not very nice, Stephanie commented, her nose wrinkling. He's trash-talking the other player. Watch how his lips curl up. He's sneering at him. Dave pressed another few buttons on the remote, and suddenly we could hear him. This is an all-boys school, Murphy, Ethan panted as he moved across the court. No girls allowed. Shut up, Winters, his opponent huffed and swatted the ball back at Ethan's side. Except your mother, Ethan continued without missing a beat. We all know an exception gets made for her around here. Dave muted it again. Okay, I could concede that little Dorit was right about Ethan being not very nice. Not like that was a big surprise. I mean, he must be the Scrooge for a good reason. But boys talk trash when they play sports, right? That's just what they do. And seriously, he was so insanely attractive, it was hard not to forgive him everything. It was not lost on me that I'd been inside Ethan Winter's bedroom at least once or twice a week for the next 6 months, sifting through his dreams, his memories, hovering over him as he slept. Are you quite all right, Havisham? Boz came up to me. You look feverish. Oh, I hope you're not getting sick, said Stephanie with genuine concern. There's a bad bug going around at NYU. Don't you live near there? I didn't get sick, of course. Another plus that came with being technically deceased. I'm fine, I murmured. It's just warm in here. Boz followed my gaze to the screen and Ethan. He's a novelty, I'll admit. Not the normal selection, but I think he has real potential. Yes, hot potential. But there was more to it than that. From the moment they tagged Ethan's picture to the board, I'd felt a zing of recognition. He was the first Scrooge I'd ever encountered who was anything like me, younger than 50 and at the start of his life, totally unaware that it was all about to go up in smoke. I found the very idea of Ethan fascinating. Would he do what I've done? Would he doubt? Would he laugh it off? Would he refuse to let it get to him? Or would he do what I should have done? Would he change? So, Dorit, Dave jumped in with his usual jovial voice, breaking me out of my introspection. How are you finding your time at Project Scrooge this year? Enjoyable, I hope, and not too overwhelming. It's been everything I could have possibly imagined and more, Stephanie said, kiss up. And Havisham here is treating you well, Boz prompted. I glanced up and met her eyes. Now would not be the best time for her to tell him all about the stupid errands I've been sending her on. Best boss I ever had, she answered. Total kiss up. Boz nodded. I'm so glad to hear it. I knew that you and Havisham would hit it off, and then they were all smiling weirdly. God. Apparently this is Dave's last year as the clock, I said to change the subject to something that wasn't me. So you're lucky to be here to get to witness his action. My last year? Wow, Stephanie softly. I bet you're going to miss it. More than I could ever express, Dave replied. What do you think was the best part of the job, she asked. The people, he answered immediately. I will miss my coworkers, some more than others. They did that weird smile thing again. So it looks like we're all set, Boss said. We've got eyes on Ethan Winters. I turned my attention back to the monitors. Ethan wasn't on any of them anymore. He'd finished his match and gone into the locker room, where tragically there were no cameras allowed. Almost, Dave corrected. I have a few bugs to work out and a few more places to set up a feed. But then we'll be ready. Ready for what? Asked Stephanie. Ready to break inside Ethan's head, I said with a grin. For once, I couldn't wait to get started. Well, everyone, we have reached the end of chapter 4, and it seems like it is starting to get good. Come on back and join me for chapter 5, and let's see how this turns out. See you soon.